Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here at the CAG Summer Institute. My name is Dr. Julia Nyberg, and I serve as Executive Director for the California Association for the Gifted.
Hello, my name is Krista Landgraf, and I serve as President for California Association for the Gifted.
If you'd like to share how you're transferring these ideas into practice, please don't hesitate to use the chat during this event. It is at the bottom of your screen. You are also more than welcome to ask questions at any time using the Q&A pod.
And join CAG today, either by an individual membership or by a school membership. If you do the school membership, you get discounts. So that's a push with your school district. You can join us by going to cagifted.org and clicking on membership. This session will last from 9 o'clock to 9:50. Next session will begin at 10. You don't have to leave the room. You stay in the same room all day long.
I have the distinct honor of introducing Dr. Sandra Kaplan. Dr. Sandra Kaplan is Professor Emeritus at the University of Southern California and has been the principal investigator of 4 Jacob Javits grants funded by the Department of Education. Dr. Kaplan is an active member and past president of the California Association for the Gifted and currently serves as chair of the Education Committee for the organization. Her research focuses on non-traditional identification instruments to recognize underrepresented students as gifted. Dr. Kaplan has received awards for excellence from the Council for Exceptional Children, the National Association for the Gifted for Service and Achievement, and research awards from the California Association for the Gifted. Now, we did have some technical snafus this morning, and we want to let the audience know that this is an unusual format, but we invite you to understand because you've all been in an environment where you've been teaching online for COVID, and we've had some difficulties with the doc cam setup this morning. So that's just our disclaimer before we begin, but we welcome you all and we look forward to the conversation today. Welcome, Dr. Kaplan.
Thank you very, very much, Julia, for the time that you've just spent trying to help me get organized with this computer issue. And I want to thank everybody for the opportunity that I have in sharing with you some information about gifted education that I have, really thought a great deal about, but haven't really presented before. So while we're going to be presenting it kind of in a different way, nonetheless, I hope that this information will stimulate some of your thinking about gifted education and some of your inquiry about gifted education. So let me just start by saying, through the years, I've always kind of laughed at how I got involved in gifted education. And I know some of you have heard the story, but I'd like to just take a minute to talk about it. When I was first looking for a job in education, it was a time when jobs were really very difficult to come to. And I finally got an interview with a principal who said, would you really like to work at this school? And I said, oh, yes, yes, with great eagerness. And the person said to me, well, if you're willing to teach the students that belong to those CUME folders, remember CUME folders, some of you? The aggregate of information about a student. He said, you can have the job. So I said, oh, yes, of course. Well, it turned out that those CUME folders represented the 2nd, 3rd grade gifted class. And I knew very little about gifted students, but learned very quickly from them what gifted education was, what it was not, and really, started my pursuit for many, many years to follow in terms of gifted education. But one of the things I recognized is something that I'd like to talk to you about today, that there are some misunderstandings about gifted education that I don't think that we've really attended to. And you may not agree with me, and that's great, because dialogue is important for learning. But I want to share with you, at least from my perspective, that we have gifted students that misunderstand the nature of giftedness. And it's usually our fault, the fault that we've had due to the fact that we were so interested in making sure that there were opportunities for gifted students that sometimes we forgot that maybe in our zest for really trying to initiate programs, curricular structures, opportunities for gifted students, that maybe we didn't really clarify to them what it was all about. So that's what I want to do. I want to share with you some ideas, and you can agree or disagree, but I hope that they're the impetus for you to start to think about some things in terms of gifted education in a different way. So let me introduce you to one of my sites here. And I get to hold it up. So Julia, can they see it? Well,
Yes, if you have it back towards you, right on top of you, they'll be able to see it as long as it's on top of you.
so I want to introduce you to this gifted individual. This gifted individual wears the banner of giftedness all the time. Meet the A. The A is really important, and it's always adorning this gifted student's experiences in some way. So it may not really be showing the way the pictorial representation is, as a banner across the chest, but nonetheless, it's something that's always there. I'm smart. I'm an A. Well, that's one. Then I want you to meet another one. And this is a student that, oh, just a minute, I'm sorry. There we go. This is a student who actually sees the A as part of the person's being. The A is internal to the individual. And all you have to do is poke around a little bit and the A will come out because it is who I am. I'm an A. Don't you understand that? I'm an A in everything I do, and I want you to just recognize it. And then I want you to see one more example, and that is the student who begins work with the understanding that the only way to really do the work is to get an A. And if it's not worth getting an A, why would I bother doing the work? So I want you to really understand that the A is a driving force. The A is who gifted students sometimes see themselves as, what that A represents. So let's talk about it. How did this come about? What can we do about it? And what are some of the things that happen when you're driven by the A because you think that's your identity and that's your nature of intellectual worth? Okay, so let's think about it. One of the first things I want to advocate for is the idea that we don't really help gifted students understand what giftedness is and what it is not. Okay? We've set it up so it looks much more glamorous than probably it really is in some cases. We set it up so that the A is the expectation that drives you rather than a variety of other factors. How come there isn't a situation that is honest, that is filled with the integrity that we need it to be, that really helps students understand what really being identified as gifted means? So let's go through some of this. One of the things that we're talking about is the idea that have we helped students understand what going to school really means? Is there a lesson that really describes what going to school is? The role of the teacher and the role of the student, where they are similar, where they are different, where one becomes, the dominant and the other one becomes subordinate. Have we taught that to students? Have we helped them understand as well that going to school does in fact necessitate the idea that you come in already knowing some things, that school is not just the place where you learn, that you carry ideas to school? Do we give them the chance to really see that the knowledge that they have has a place in a lesson? And I know there's a time factor. I know that there's the standards. I know that there's the curricular, measurement at the end of the semester that we need to comply with, or at least, prepare students for. I understand all this, but that doesn't mean that you come into school empty, okay? And so what are we going to do about it? Have we really explained to our gifted students the nature of the fact that you take your learning to school as well as get your learning in school? Okay, sounds good. But there's something else now, and that is there are some things that we don't talk about that help students understand that the A is not the only goal, that being smart is also understanding the times that you're not so smart at something, that being good at something doesn't mean you're good at something all the time. Do we teach this as either a curricular structure or an integral feature of curriculum? Do you and I know what it means when a student says, oh, I'm so sorry about this. When a student says, you know something, I already know this. And having, taught even adults, it's kind of an interesting issue when somebody says, excuse me, I already know this. So does that mean that I have no worth as a teacher in that situation? Does that mean you know it in a way that is commensurate with what it is we're teaching? Does it mean that you are successful at knowing it? What does it mean? And have we really talked to students about that? As opposed to seeing this as a challenge to the teacher. I already know this, meaning, why are you going to waste your time trying to teach me about it? Why don't we see this as the impetus for a question? What do you already know about this? How does it align to what it is that we're going to be learning? What could your contribution be? And how does that help other people learn from what you already know? Why don't we see this as helping a student understand that this is not a defense mechanism? This is giving information about self as a learner.
Dr. Kaplan, can you move it back just a little bit because it's slightly out of focus? Yes. Yes. Like that. Perfect. I'm sorry, but that's how we can see. Otherwise, it's fuzzy.
Okay. Well, as long as it's fuzzy, that's okay. Okay. Let's look at another one. I chose three really kind of interesting comments. Another one is, I tried, I just can't do this. What do you mean you can't do this? How is it that you can't do this? You're supposed to be gifted. So have we set up conditions in the classroom where students are afraid, unwilling to really tell you what they don't know? Because and listen, I teach adults, I've taught children, I understand. When somebody says, I tried this, but I can't do it, my comment to myself, and sometimes verbally is, well, why don't you try a little bit harder? But that's not what it's about. That's not what it is at all. What it is saying that you may overestimate me. You may not understand that even though I might be gifted, I'm not gifted in all areas at all times. And I may not know it. Okay, one last one. The one that I kind of laugh about because I think it's so, kind of familiar in my experiences with either adults as well as children. That is, I'm done. I'm finished. Excuse me? We've only been working on this for X amount of time. How can you be finished? And it's really interesting. What does done mean? What does done mean? I was watching a movie the other day, an old movie about Louis Pasteur, and I really was amused by the fact that one of his colleagues said to him, Louis, aren't you done already? Look how long you've been working on it. And he said, the work may never be done. Parts of it are completed. I think we need to really understand what I'm done means. For some students, it means that I've had enough of this. We're ready to move on. For some students, it means that I've done the best I can do. And I wish that your expectations were more in alignment with what it is that I need to know to really be, quote, done, end quote. And for some students, it means I'm tired of this. How come we're hanging around on this idea or this particular task for so long? Have we really, as teachers, understood some of the implications of what it is that our students are saying? And are they really understanding, where in fact their feelings, their particular abilities, are really more their responsibility than the teacher's responsibility? Is there another way to say, I've learned a lot about this. Could I add ... to it? So that's what I'd like to do right now. I'd like to say, given all of these different ideas about the fact that many of our students do not understand the nature of giftedness, that many of their educators or teachers do not understand the implications of giftedness. What can we do? What can we do? So before we talk about all the curriculum that we can do in terms of differentiation, before we talk about, all of those different ways that we can take the curriculum and make it amenable to the needs, interests, and abilities of gifted students, let's just talk about some of the learning kinds of skills, characteristics, needs that gifted kids should have. How can we help them learn about giftedness so that they can use their giftedness in productive and self-fulfilling ways? And some of these will be available to you, on our website. But here's one. Have we really thought about how we can go through the process of helping students self-assess before a learning experience or during the learning experience? Can we really help students go through the process of saying, wait a minute, so one of the things we have to do is read the story and then write a summary? So what is my understanding of that task? Write a summary. What in fact are my interests in this whole subject area or this whole task of reading? Am I more interested in characterization? Am I more interested in writing? Oh, this would be more of a chance to practice writing, which I love doing, than the idea of really just reading, which I can do really easily. Do I have enough time? Or do I have too much time? And if I could do this really quickly, what am I going to do in the time that I have before the whole class moves on to another task? And what learning abilities, who am I that I can bring some of my characteristics to this learning task? Incidentally, I think we have many, even adult gifted learners that have very little understanding of self in the learning situations. And incidentally, one of the things that I think is interesting is that the perceptions of self change in different kinds of settings and tasks throughout a day. I don't know about you, but I feel a lot differently about mathematics and my abilities in math than I do in social studies. So time on task and understandings and interest and learning abilities change. I don't think that you have to turn this into a teacher. I don't think that's what it is at all. I think that we introduce that in our classroom, and I don't care whether you happen to be a first grader or whether you're a 12th grader, or even if you're in kindergarten, you need to start to look at yourself and help students. We need to help them as educators see who they are as learners. How does this relate to time? How does this relate to previous understandings? How does this relate to interests? And incidentally, it doesn't relate to interest. Well, then what's your responsibility? To pout? To say I've already done this? To say this isn't important? Or to look at how you can attach yourself to the task? I will never forget, ever forget, doing a geometry lesson with students. And the student said, I really love geometry. This is great. And I'm thinking to myself, this is an interesting comment from this student who incidentally did not do, if you talk about it in terms of academic achievement, really do well in that area. So I said to this person, tell me, what is it you love? I love drawing, and geometry is really an opportunity to draw. It's not something I would see, but do you see how we get attached to things in different ways? And the attachment is, yes, possibly my responsibility to, really go through the process of exciting, of providing some kind of motivation, but it's also your own responsibility. And I think that one of the things that we have done in gifted education is that we've given most of the responsibility for learning to the teachers. We need to go through the process of giving more responsibility to the learner. So let me show you some conversations that we might have with our learners. And I've named them all the experiential gap, not because they're all experiential gaps as such, but because in fact, I don't think that we've given them enough experiences in seeing self as a learner. So in this case, when I talk about the experiential gap, I'm talking about your misunderstanding or your lack of understanding about self as a learner. For example, here are 3 different lessons. One on botany, another lesson on social studies, a lesson on science, and the teacher's teaching them, and some students say, these are boring. Really? What is your responsibility to find out how you can connect? In the experiential gap, your responsibility is to see how you can close who you are with what is being taught. And yes, it's my responsibility as a teacher to try to motivate you. There's no doubt about that. I assume that responsibility. But I'm not responsible for all of it. Where are we doing, or what are we doing to help students understand the responsibility of being a learner? So let me show you another example. In this particular idea, one of the things that we're talking about is, we expect you to get better at the task, of course. So isn't this interesting? Do you get better all at once? No, there are different levels of expertise. Have we helped kids understand that? For example, let's go back to the idea of writing a summary of a story read. There are different levels of expertise in summarizing. Have we helped students understand what that is? For example, besides the key ideas, the idea of using words, which words give the greatest impact? And just the idea of selection of words becomes an area of expertise. The idea of being able to see that the way in which you present from simple to complex or complex to simple has a lot to do with developing expertise. So there are different levels of expertise. Somebody said to me, in a common household task, this person had baked a cake, and the cake was being served, and everybody was going, oh, it's so fabulous. So hard to build a cake like that. Oh, so many layers, and oh my goodness. And this person kind of looked and said, I really appreciate all the compliments. I really do. But let me tell you, what I thought was really achievement today was the idea that I could put all those layers together without cracking any of them. And we all kind of laughed and said, well, that was simple. But you see, we were judging expertise against us as an individual, not expertise as that person was looking at it for themselves. So can we help students understand that there are not only different levels of expertise, but different levels of expertise are held by different people on the same task? How about this conversation? The conversation about why we learn it. Why is it important? Why is it important? I don't really like science. Why do I have to spend some time doing it? Well, what are you interested in? I love history. History is predicated on much to do with science. Without understanding science, could we really have moved forward, for example, in all kinds of situations like the westward movement? How we help students understand that you can fall in love and be really very excited about a subject, but that subject has tentacles to other subjects. So when somebody like me says, well, I hate math, I love art. But how come I was never really helped to understand that artistic renderings do have a mathematical factor in them? So help students understand why we learn certain things, that it's not just because it's going to be on a test. It's not just because it's the way to get to college. It's not just because you have to. It's because there are connections. And many of us are very concerned that our students don't see the connections within and between what's known as the disciplines. Here's another experiential gap: the understanding of what really takes dominance in a learning situation. Why are some things really dominant while others are really subordinate? And it has to do with a lot of factors. I was just at one of the local museums, and I was kind of humored by the fact that I'm standing in front of the same painting with many other people. And what I saw was very different than what some others saw. What I thought was really interesting, some others said, "Oh my gosh, look at that. It was a Picasso. Look at that. The nose is crooked." It was crooked for a reason. And I'm not saying that the person who, diminished that particular attribute was wrong. I just need to say that we don't help students understand that we all don't see it in the same way. So I want to give you another example. I don't know, I'm sure all of you have your favorite book, but when you were a kid, but mine was Little Women. I must have read it, at least 10 times. Well, lo and behold, I was at a bookstore recently, a real bookstore, and there is an edition out of Little Women, which somebody has taken the time and effort and creativity to extend the lives of some of the women from Little Women. Somebody said to me, "Why would you read that? It's fiction." Well, the whole thing was fiction. But the point is, that was the wrong question. Why are you reading that? The question is, what is it about that that stands out for you? What was the thing that interests you? And all of us are not interested in the same thing. We have many gifted students who have hidden their interest because it's not the norm or because it doesn't really coincide with what, in fact, people think is really what gifted kids should be interested in. So let's talk about what stands out and how does that drive your success, your interest, your abilities in a particular subject. Another thing I want to talk about is the experiential gap that has to do with associating the new with the old. The thing that I think is so interesting is that and I've done this myself as an educator, get all excited about introducing something, that's new and, helping the students understand that this is new and it's interesting and you haven't probably had, any confrontation with it previously. And then I think to myself, I'm trying to sell something, much the way somebody sells a commodity, but that's not what it is about. Is that we're going to be learning something new, but how does it connect to that which you already know? What is that connection? And the more we can help students connect, the more they can invest in what we're trying to teach them that is new. I know this takes time, but so does the complaint, "This is boring." So does the complaint when a student says, "How long is this going to go on?" you know, I need to think about what I can do to teach students how to be a student, a scholar, a learner, and not just run for the A, or not just see themselves as gifted and have some misconceptions about what that means. One more that I think is interesting is the idea that, what do you already know about this? I think to myself, in many ways, one of the big mistakes I made in really teaching was not going backwards to go forwards. And I feel that way in a sense, even with all of you, some of this you already know. And I haven't given you, enough credit for saying that you do know some of this. The point is that none of us go in empty. There's always seeds of something that we already know. Have we taken some time at the beginning of a lesson, in the middle of the lesson, to talk about, what is it you already know about it? Or what is it that you think will be a sticking point for you in this lesson? Something that will stay with you, that will be something that you'll underscore, that you'll remember. And it may not be the same thing that I would remember in any way, shape, or form. Why can't we allow individual differences in how we learn, not just in, what it is that we're learning? I don't see enough of that. I don't see enough of that at all. And I think that needs to be really something that we start to look at, especially with our gifted students who sometimes, as I said at the outset of this particular session, don't even understand why they're learning something, let alone how to go about bringing the self into learning. Okay, two other points in looking at the experiential gap. One is, have we really helped students understand the implications of what we're learning today for tomorrow? And I'm not talking about, someday you're going to need this to go to college, or someday, you'll be thankful that you know this when you are ... I'm just talking about, gee, think about this. What would be a really good example of what we're learning today that you might use some other time in some other place? I think one of the most interesting things that ever happened to me was I was in a foreign country, and it was Italy. And we were looking at one of the, well, we were not just looking, we were enjoying the opportunity of seeing one of the well-known fountains. And there was a child there with parents, and the child said, I'm really interested in this. Why is it that this water doesn't smell and isn't, and he used the word stagnant, like other waters that are in a pool, if they're not, constantly moving? I think someday I need to find out more about this. This was something that I thought was so interesting. And the parents said, just enjoy the experience of looking at this fountain. It's very, very famous. Okay. So yes, the fountains of Trevi are important. There's no doubt about it. They're famous. But do you see what I'm trying to get across? Is that we don't give enough credit to the fact that what is often taught or shown or experienced by a student may be just something that is a thought for tomorrow, something that someday they'll investigate further or want to find out more about. And I want to give credit to that. And I want to also give credit to the fact that when it's all said and done, whoops, I'm sorry. So that it's also, how do we stay curious? I see a lack of curiosity, an empathetic kind of presentation for a lot of our students. Oh, again. Now, part of this is affect, okay? Part of this is just, kind of the affect of a student that we understand. But some of it's really very sincere. It's the idea that we haven't really developed the art of curiosity. It's an art form. It's a skill that's taught. It's a skill that's taught. So I want to talk about how you teach curiosity. First of all, you teach curiosity, no matter how old the person is, by having them look at a small part of a whole. You look at it, sorry for that. There you go. You look at a small part of it. I think that one of the things, even as I'm speaking to you, I'm giving you a big picture. I wonder, if, although I tried with the introduction of the A's, of helping you understand a small part of the problem. Curiosity is evoked by looking at a small part that gives you a window of an interest in, an opportunity for looking at something further. Do you teach curiosity in the same way that you teach sequencing, or that you teach how to write a good summary? Have we really forgotten that our job is to teach curiosity? And then we talk about the empathy, that we have for students. They don't seem to be as excited in school, but have we developed that excitement? And how do we do that? Well, one way you do it by examining a small part of the whole. The other thing that we do is we look at a part of the bigger picture. So if we're talking about a summary of a story, okay, can we talk about how this relates to the bigger picture? Why we summarize, what summaries do for people to be enticed to look at the whole of an experience? Do we help students understand that curiosity is something that is always, always part of every lesson? That we ponder what it was, what it could be, what's behind it, why it's there, how it's there, when it's there. I don't see enough of that. And somebody said to me, well, that's not measured. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. To the development of one's ability to do a particular task, aligned to that is one's curiosity in learning the task. And staying curious is what really being gifted is all about to some degree. We're talking about identifying students that have a propensity toward being curious. It's that curiosity that pulls them into learning, that helps them sustain their interest in learning, that uses their abilities that we have identified. And yet we assume that curiosity is there without teaching curiosity. My whole goal is to move away, and I think some of you have heard me talk about this, from looking at good grades. My whole goal is to look at, have we developed the idea of students who are scholars? Have we developed learning to learn skills? And I think that we haven't really spent enough time talking about what scholarliness is. Scholarliness is not wearing the A as a badge or thinking that the A is the only way to gain recognition or to reinforce one's ability as a gifted individual. There are scholarly behaviors. One of the scholarly behaviors I just talked about is curiosity. And so he said, you know, these kids aren't very curious today. Really? Really? I don't see that. I don't see it as part of the curriculum, but I see it as part of the natural proclivity of being a student, of being an individual. And in those situations where curiosity has been nurtured, we're asking questions, we're poking around in things, becomes an important part of the learning process. Okay, here's another issue. Another scholarly behavior is the ability to really spend some time just pondering. What do you think would have happened if? Why do you suppose that this reaction occurred from? Just pondering, giving some thought to it. We're so darn busy looking for the right answer that sometimes we have really missed the idea of what it is to ponder, to think about, to really give some kind of, questioning, some kind of probing, some kind of what if to a situation. And I'm not saying that we should give up, looking for the right answer. There's a time for that, of course. But have you ever thought about who did the probing to get the right answer? Who exerted the curiosity to get the right answer? Who really had the thirst for knowing to get the right answer? Have we spent enough time teaching our students what scholarliness is, opposed to just being the idea of the person who gets the high grades and is, quote, our class scholar, end quote? We need to really talk about the idea that scholarliness is taking a risk, is trying something. Well, I'm not good at that, so I don't want to do it. Or I don't think it's, I don't want to do that. I'm not good at that. Really? It's the not good at things. It's the idea that maybe sometimes when you're not good at things, that's the impetus for really learning and using your abilities in a new way, in a new way. And I think that we have students who have taken their abilities and contained them and never see that those abilities have tentacles that reach out and can give other kinds of experiences. So I want to teach learning to learn skills. I want to teach students how to learn. You learn by pondering. You learn by taking a risk. You learn by perseverance. You learn in terms of seeing that what you can learn today has implications for tomorrow. You need to really help students learn how to learn, not just learn what is to be taught or known at a particular time. So, a couple of other ideas. One of the things that we might want to talk about is a little bit more about what the real goal is. The real goals, for example, there we go. Does that help? Well, okay, the real goals, for example, are to really be able to understand that there's an affective quality in the cognitive development of one's giftedness, the ability to really understand how to get clarity for something, how to ask questions to really get clarity. There's something called intellectual humility to say, I don't know it, or I didn't get it, or would you please explain it again? Or could you explain it in another way? I think we have so many gifted students that hide their ability to ask questions for fear that it eradicates some element of their giftedness. It's wrong. There's also intellectual integrity, the idea that sometimes you can argue a point, sometimes you disagree, and that's okay. And disagreement is a way of developing new insights. We also need to look at the idea of intellectual courage, the idea that, to come up with an alternative, and intellectual leadership, to be able to, work with peers and help them understand that you can have different ideas, etc. The point that I want to bring out here is that we've spent so much time on the development of what's known as the right answer, the intellectual response to something that reinforces one's giftedness, rather than looking at the dimensions of intellectualism that are part of giftedness that lie dormant. The idea of, really understanding why we learn, how we learn, and that there are lots of things that go into the learning process that really are important, that have more than just the elements of the right answer. But there's also something else, and that is when it's all said and done, I want students to understand that there are different pathways to success. And incidentally, it doesn't have, I put the A just as an example, but it could be a B. It could be, still needs work on it. But there are different pathways. How we really help students understand that, yes, for some students, it's a straight line. Just tell me what to do and I can do it. For some students, it takes tremendous curves and time. And for some students, it has ups and downs. Is there anywhere in a classroom where the students can understand that we all don't have to learn in the same way and still be accomplished? It is so important that we're not really helping people understand that we are really trying very desperately to show individuality among the gifted, not just between the gifted and their non-gifted peers. This is a sign that we had in a classroom that we spend a lot of time with. Let me just get it down here. Just talking about the fact that there are different ways that you can learn. Notice the one thing that they all have in common. They're all going in the direction. Whether you're student A, B, C, D, or even student E, okay, what we're doing is we're trying to show that there are different pathways. I started this conversation by saying that one of the things I think is really a need that we have is to start to look at the fact that you could be gifted and you don't have to always get A's. You could be gifted because you have certain characteristics of learning that it is my job as an educator, as your teacher, as your parent, to help you understand that you can activate those particular traits in different ways at different times. That sometimes, that you can work fast. Sometimes you have to work slow. Sometimes you have to ask a lot of questions. Sometimes you have to answer a lot of questions. Sometimes you have to make a mistake and try again. But the idea being that you don't walk around believing that because you are gifted, you're always an A. That one of the things that we know is that being gifted has a whole range of things that you can practice and do. And that the most important thing is that we come to school to learn, but we walk into the school situation already knowing things. I am desperate, as many of you are as well, in helping students understand what giftedness is and what it is not. Helping students understand that giftedness has many dimensions to it, that there are times when you can say it's boring. And it doesn't mean that you give up working. There are times when you can say, I already know this, and you ask yourself, what else can I learn from it? There are times when you can say, I don't get it, and you ask questions, or you practice in a way to learn it. That we can't help students really be better students, be more self-directed students, and I mean better by being scholars, without helping them understand what the nature of giftedness is and what it is not. So I thank you for putting up with the technological difficulties. I thank you for the time that you've given me to share with you some of my ideas. Julia, are there some questions or comments?
Thank you so much, Dr. Kaplan. How do you balance the conversations with students where the curiosity may not be appropriate for them in terms of their age? What does that conversation sound like? Or also, we've had many times in the classroom, the curiosity either may not be appropriate for their age, or the curiosity may be well beyond the content standards for their age as well. How do you balance that conversation? What does that conversation sound like in the classroom?
So you bring up an excellent point. Let me do this. Let's just say that we have to teach X, okay, whatever X is. I don't think we understand that we have to help students understand why X is important. I mean, I think to myself, even teaching adults, I could say, according to the state guidelines, I have to teach, different elements related to literature. But I never put it in the context of why it's important. Not why it's important in the bigger picture. The bigger picture of just being a person. Why do we need to learn how to read? Why do we need to learn how to decode a word? So I think if we could give students the reality of why it's important, then I think at least just have a different kind of relationship to what we're learning. I also think that we don't break enough of it down, Julia, so that we see the parts of the whole. So I think to myself, even in the conversation, in the presentation I just did, I hope I broke it down enough to understand that I'm not saying that giftedness is not important. I'm saying that have we helped get children understand what giftedness is and is not. So do we break it down so it's digestible? I mean, your question is fabulous. I hope that I've at least tried to answer it to some degree, giving it meaning.
Absolutely. I know that Krista has another question for you from the Q&A pod that she's going to read out loud.
I do. Some of the questions that I've seen, one is they want to know if they have access to any of your slides, the slides that you're showing. And particularly there was one woman in the comments that was going on how she really values looking at those because it helps to visualize what it is you're saying and enjoying having those visuals.
So they will have access. Yes,
Yes.
Julia will get them and post them where they need to be. But the most important thing is that, and I want to say, Julia, in relationship to the question you asked too, I think that we need to, as teachers, understand not just to be compliant, but to be explanatory. And I've done that myself. Well, we have to learn this. It's going to be on the CalTech, the test or whatever. And I don't think that sometimes I've even taken the time to explain why it's there and the implications that it has. That's number one. Number two, I wanted to say something else, Julia, and that is that whatever I have to teach, how can I just simply say to students, what does this connect with in terms of your interest or your abilities? It doesn't mean that the connection has to be right there and then we have to do it, but think about the connections that you can make so that we don't introduce all these lessons as if all of our students are already empty with the idea or, disinterested in the idea. You bring up an excellent point. Thank you.
I do have that other question. It says, what are the benefits or what does it do for students to test to see if they are highly gifted versus just gifted? I have parents that ask.
I will give you my answer, but it's not a common answer. So I think the person needs to ask it to somebody who's a psychologist. But from the standpoint of an educator, I don't know what difference it makes unless the information becomes a hindrance or an object for the child's intellectual and psychological well-being. I mean, it's funny. I was talking to a person who's a doctor, and he said one of the things that he thought was really very interesting was that people want to, if you say to somebody, well, how is my blood pressure? And the doctor says, normal, you're fine. And so he says, well, I want to know exactly what it is. And his question was, why do they want to know exactly what it is when they really, why can't the general answer be important? And I think to myself, that's a really important way to kind of look at things. How much specificity versus how much general knowledge do we need on some of these issues? If a parent really wants to know more, then why is having more information about the intellectual development important to the child's development? Or is it just a status or issue? Or is it just, curiosity? Good question.
Absolutely. Thank you all for directing your questions to the Q&A pod. That ensures that we don't miss any in the chat, and it also enables the presenter to focus on their presentation so they're not having to follow the chat at the same time. Thank you so much, Dr. Kaplan, and we will have fingers and toes crossed that your dot cam is working tomorrow. I know that that can be a little bit flustering, but assure you that we all understand because we have all taught online and we all understand that the technology is not our friend at all times.
I just want to know if I got an A for the presentation because A's are really important.
Got an A for the presentation, and we're all curious.
Well, there's my friend Jenny. Okay, thanks everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Go ahead and close us out, Krista.
Okay, your certificate of participation will be emailed to you 1 week after the last day of this event. The next session will begin at 10 o'clock in this very same room. You don't have to go anywhere. If you want to learn more about us, please join us on Facebook or X or Instagram by searching cagifted.org. And video recordings will be available approximately 3 weeks from this event.